Good morning. So I would like to know how many of you in this room are students? Okay. And how many of you are faculty? Did I leave anyone out? So I want to begin by asking for your help. My first question to you is, of the faculty members who are here, how many of you received training in instructional methods before you became a university teacher? How many? Raise your hands if you were trained. Raise them high. So most of you learned about teaching on the job. And how many of you, after you came here, had the opportunity to work with a faculty development officer to help you with your teaching? How many faculty had that service provided to them by the university? No one?
No.
Okay. So now let me turn to the students, because I don't know the practices here. In your courses, what is it that's done to allow you an opportunity to provide input to your teacher about their teaching? What is the practice? Thank you. Is there any practice?
Surveys at the end of the course.
You do, and what do those consist of usually?
A couple boxes to tick from 1 to 10 or so in a couple parameters, and an open box, I think, many people feel.
To provide comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what happens to them after they're completed? Are any of the results known to you?
Not to us.
So there's no public information about teachers and about the quality of their teaching? No.
There's friends reviews.
There's there's the classic method, we call in North America the grapevine. I don't know if you use that term. Okay, thank you. That helps me a lot. So I'm going to talk about the assessment of teaching in higher education. Hopefully a lot of what I'll say has some familiarity to you. And if not, stop me. Okay. We will, I'm afraid it's going to be very busy today.
See why?
Ah. That's not me. It's a bonus. And I think we want to reflect on three key questions. The first is it useful and important to evaluate teaching? So depending on our orientation to that question, the reaction to some of the evidence I'm going to present may be different. The second question, and I will say this right from the outset, many of you are in psychology. I understand maybe all of you are in psychology. So you know a little bit about psychometrics, and you know that there is no such thing as a perfect assessment tool. Teacher evaluation instruments are imperfect measures of teaching quality. So our question really is the use of those imperfect devices better than no assessment at all? And then our third question is, can research evidence help to improve the evaluation process? So how do we use almost 100 years and thousands of research articles? One of the most highly researched topic in the world is about the assessment of teaching. The first evaluation instrument was developed by H.H. Remmers at Purdue University, I think 1919.
1950.
Keep going. So I'm going to have to be very careful today. Anyway, a long time ago, in another land, so, you know, this is one of those topics of great passion among people. You know, I just as an aside, I teach a graduate course on learning theories. And one of the things that I do at the beginning of the course is I ask the students, I say, tell me the criteria that we should use to evaluate learning theories, you know, behaviorism, constructivism, etc. And they talked about, you know, the validation of the theory as very important, the utility of the theory as very important, the scope and comprehensiveness of the theory, these are important criteria. Simplicity is another important criteria. So they go through a whole bunch of criteria in this academic exercise of talking about what makes a good learning theory. And at the end of that hour or two that we spend on that, I say, you're lying. You're lying to me. You haven't told me the most important single criterion about a learning theory. And that is your personal opinion. Because we all have very strong opinions on how we learn and what's effective learning. And we have very strong personal opinions about the evaluation and assessment of teaching, no matter what the evidence says. So my final question is about really evidence-based practice, and can research evidence help improve the evaluation process? So in North America, most faculty, when they have to apply for promotion or annual review or merit, and especially tenure, have to prepare a teaching dossier. Those teaching dossiers are becoming so comprehensive that when a senior member of faculty gets them, you get them electronically only because they are too big and too costly for the department to print. So these are the many sources of evidence that can and do form a teaching dossier. But it is very often the case that of those multiple sources of evidence, the single most widely used for the purposes of summative assessment are student evaluations of teaching. And so our question is, how is the evidence from these dossiers, and in particular, how is the evidence from student evaluations of teaching used, or how should it be used to make judgments about teaching? So student evaluations, I'll call them teacher rating forms, or student evaluations of sets, or course evaluations, are used because, for several reasons. They're very time and cost efficient. They have great flexibility and comparability across a whole range of teaching contexts. They are historically advocates of student ratings to recognize that students, and I'll look at this part of the room while I'm speaking, because you are the consumers of teaching. You are our customers, and we need to make sure that we have done everything we can to make sure that your learning and your learning experience is the best it can be. That's part of our professional responsibility. And you are here at university implicitly because you believe that this is a place where you will learn and flourish and grow. So our contract with students as teachers is a very essential part of why these institutions exist. And so, like every other facet of university work, we have to make sure that we're taking steps to make sure that teaching quality is as high as it can be, and that we're taking steps to improve the quality of teaching where it occurs. The reliability of student ratings, especially relative to other sources of evidence, is very, very high. In the first half, the first 2/3 of the last century, boy, do I sound like an old man when I say that, it was more common for departmental chairs and senior colleagues to evaluate teaching, often by informal office chats and occasionally by classroom visitations. Well, if you've studied observational methodology, you'll know that an occasional classroom visit, a brief hallway chat, doesn't provide a sufficient sample of behavioral evidence to form an accurate and no less reliable judgment. So while that's often given as an important source of evidence, the psychometric properties of colleague and chair evaluations it's just much less reliable than data collected from a large group of students who are exposed to teaching for many, many, many hours. And of course, the last issue for using student ratings has to do with their validity. Are they reasonably good measures of the learning that students experience, or as a product of good quality teaching? So that's one of the things we're going to be examining in some depth. So here's some of the concerns or challenges about student evaluations. The first is that teaching is a multi-dimensional process. And in fact, I don't know what's prevalent at this university, but I began my career lecturing. Ending my career using very different teaching methods, much more student-centered methods. I rely a lot on cooperative learning strategies, small group instructional methods, and there are strategies for doing that well. Project-based and problem-based inquiry methods, and much more student-centered methods, which I am not doing today, but teaching and in the integration of technology. We were talking in the cafeteria before about blended learning opportunities where I have some of my classes live, and then I use a tool called Adobe Connect, and I give about half of my courses via the internet. So we have multimedia, and we're talking about how, I don't know how many of you have taken courses at a distance. Any of you? Okay, a couple. Well, that's coming. That's coming. And the good thing about it is that you can very easily integrate multimedia into those courses. The challenging thing about it is that students can post questions and comments during your presentation, so you're presenting and you're monitoring questions as the presentation is going on. It's very difficult to do. So some of the other concerns, so teaching has become a very varied process. There's lecturing, there's small group work, there's discussion groups, there's online learning. And so how is it that, that evaluations can capture all of those different processes of teaching, or should they? Certainly, the biggest concern is that ratings don't measure the learning that happens in classrooms. That's the heart of the challenge. That instead ratings are popularity contests, that we evaluate teachers according to their personality rather than the substance of what they promote. That you can get great evaluations if you're an easy grader. That there are a host of other extraneous characteristics that can affect evaluations that are inappropriate or unfair, and that review committees do not evaluate the evidence that they're provided appropriately. They misuse the evidence from teaching dossiers and forming their judgments. That you can't use feedback from students to improve your teaching, and that such things as electronic portfolios are a waste of time. So we'll look at some of the evidence on several of those points today, and here is where I'm going to need as well as help. We're going to look at a few videos.
Most arrogant and intellectual, dishonest professor I've met. I wonder if you've met other professors.
Bah! I found this course to be tediously boring, and Steve was useless, although he is a very nice guy. Consolation prize.
She will mock your aspirations, then cackle over the remains of your spirit.
Before I attended his class, I thought he was a women prof.
If you want to get a good grade, avoid her, or you will get sadness. Some people are destined for sadness. ...
Boring. ...
Good lecturer, ugly shoes.
He's hot in during the lecture, but after lecture he's super cold.
Brian is terrible at explaining material. Don't let his stunning good looks and humor fool you into thinking this is an easy course.
Most arrogant and intellectual dishonest professor I've met. Oh no, that's Doug Allen.
So, those are professors reading some of their choice course evaluations. And I have to tell you, for those of us who take teaching seriously, and now I'm going to turn to this side of the room, which is most of us, some of the most hurtful things that can happen is when you receive what you think is unfounded and uncalled for criticism of the sort that those faculty members read aloud. And in North America at least, ratings are almost always done anonymously. In fact, I think you can think of very few instances where student evaluations of teaching are not done anonymously. There are occasions where students take license with the anonymous nature of evaluation, so certain faculty have asked that they not be done anonymously. So why are they done anonymously? They're done anonymously to make sure students are protected in case they do have criticisms to make, because there's a hierarchy in the university, we know it. So that's why they're done anonymously, but injury is done whenever those evaluations are not taken seriously, because they are used very seriously to make judgments about teachers and for the purposes, of course, improvement. So there are two types of assessment questions that are generally included in student ratings. The global questions, such as how would you rate this instructor in general all-around teaching ability? How much did you learn in this course? How would you rate the overall effectiveness of this course? So these are global ratings, and these are most often used by tenure committees and promotion committees to make judgments about teaching. Many evaluation instruments also include quite a number of items on specific aspects of teaching process. So were the course objectives understandable? Did the instructor communicate clearly? Did the instructor use appropriate evaluation techniques, give adequate feedback? Was he well prepared? Was he enthusiastic? Did he answer questions, permit different points of view? Was he accessible? Did he make it, or she make it easy to get help? So the first thing I want to do is talk about the value and the evidence about those two types of questions. And by and large make the case that for summative purposes, so we'll distinguish between summative assessment and formative assessment. So summative assessment using the teaching dossier and student evaluations for tenure, promotion, merit, sometimes for hiring decisions. And then formative assessment to get feedback from students to improve a course and to improve teaching. So by and large, those global ratings are very useful for summative purposes. We'll see from validation evidence that that's the case. But the specific questions increasingly, when they're part of a standardized form, are drawing increasing criticism as not always being relevant. The teaching methods one uses, for example, in a lecture situation, are very different than the strategies one uses in a small group collaborative learning situation, where things like encouraging positive interdependence and individual accountability are much more important than the clarity of the explanation given. If you do a lot of collaborative work in your classroom, the faculty member doesn't spend the predominant amount of his time giving explanations. It's the students who give explanations to each other, and it's the faculty member who facilitates that. So, we're distinguishing between the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. So those specific questions really are far more useful for formative purposes. Of all of the thousands of studies that have been done on the evaluation of teaching, there is a core of several dozen studies that really are of particular importance. And these are called the multi-section validation studies. And why these are so important is because they are multiple sections of the same course with the same textbook, often with the same outline, taught by different instructors. So they have common teaching materials. They have common examinations, usually multiple choice. They sometimes, not in every case, have students randomly assigned to the sections. Where they don't, there is an attempt at pretest equivalence. So they are what amounts to true experiments, where the only thing that varies between the sections is the teacher who's assigned to teach them. And because they use common examinations, right, so everything else is uniform. The only thing, you know, you've all taken some experimental methodology. You know that allows us to estimate the treatment. The treatment here is what is the effect of teachers, and we're looking at the difference between the sections in learning on this common final exam. So what are we going to do? We're going to relate the course ratings, the average course ratings in those multi-section courses to the average examination score. So the only way to explain differences in the course evaluations and differences in learning students is that those differences are produced by whatever the teacher did, right? So there have been 43 of those multi-section validity studies. They produced a total of 741 validity coefficients. And why there's some money when there are only 43 studies? Because a lot of them used multi-dimensional rating scales. So you can look at the ratings for specific factors as well as general teaching dimensions. And I'm referring, as I will do in many instances in my presentation, to a systematic review of the evidence, so meta-analysis. For those of you who, how many of you know what a meta-analysis is? Good. And for those of you who don't, ask for an explanation. So here's what we found when we looked at the global evidence from these validation studies. That there was a positive relationship between global ratings of teaching and instructor-produced learning, and that correlation was in the range of 0.26 to 0.4 when we correct for attenuation, because there's a limited range of rating differences and there's a limited range of learning differences when we correct for attenuation, which is a common methodological technique, correlational technique. That average correlation becomes 0.47. So there's a moderate relationship, and this is key, between student evaluations of teaching and the amount that students learn in courses of the multi-section type. Now, what are multi-section courses? They tend to be introductory courses, right? 100 level courses, basic courses. So we don't have upper level courses to compare these results to. And we don't have, we have multiple choice testing as the only type of evidence about learning. So as in all kinds of research, generalizability becomes a bit of a concern. But these are the core studies of validity for student ratings, and the evidence is, moderate. There's a moderate relationship between those two things. However, when we look at specific ratings of teaching, those specific dimensions, clarity, course objectives, helpfulness, we see that the validity coefficients are much lower. So our takeaway from the evidence is that global ratings are far better for making summative decisions of teaching than specific factors are. So, of the thousands of studies on student evaluation, many of them deal with issues about bias, about irrelevant sources of influence on student grading, such as the two biggies are teacher personality, that is, ratings are just a popularity contest and students evaluate highest those faculty who just, are nice, you have fun in class, they're engaging, they're enthusiastic, but really, they don't give you the good stuff. They don't, there isn't substance to what they do. So we're going to look at the evidence on that matter, that these are personality contests rather than hardcore evidence of quality. We already have an answer. We know that there's a moderate relationship between teaching and learning. And then grading policies. That one way to ensure you're going to get good ratings is just be a very easy grader and give everybody high grades. So we'll look at the evidence on those points in particular. Is that what I did? No. Okay. Don't go far. So the area of research that we're going to look at now on this issue of teacher personality has been called educational seduction. That is that students can be seduced into the illusion that they have learned when no learning actually takes place. And let me tell you, this is a very hot topic for conversation in that faculty dining room that is across the hall. You should go some. Called educational seduction. And in the literature, it is also known as the Dr. Fox effect, after the first demonstration of this phenomenon, way back when I had dark brown hair. And so the question is there a biasing effect of the expressive nature of an instructor when the actual content of his lecture or her lecture is low? So the Dr. Fox effect, or educational seduction. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at a video of the original Dr. Fox demonstration.
Different kinds of reasoning. Rappaport mentions in an article, this has enormous value. I would like to come back to that if I may a little later. We'll get into those in a little bit. Good point. I'll remember that.
The American Association of Medical Colleges. He's written in Science, for those of you who have subscribed to that magazine, that journal. And he also has, I think, 2 publications, 2 books on the topic that he's going to address us with today, and that is behavioral games as it applies to physician learning. Dr. Myron Fox.
Thank you. There are several advantages I notice in coming from California. One is that you can wear shorts, whereas the Easterners wear a suit, and that you can wear a mock turtleneck shirt where we wear a tie. I'd like to start today by getting into the applicability of game theory in the field of medicine and in the field of teaching. Now, when von Neumann and Morgenstern started with game theory, it was not long before they realized that game theory was not primarily concerned with disclosing the optimum strategy. What it really is concentrating on is concerned with the logic of conflict, that is, with the theory of strategy. Now, in this way, interestingly enough, being here at the gambling state of Nevada, the question could be asked, does game theory differ from gambler's choice, where there was a conflict of interest between the two parties, out of which one is to emerge victorious and one is to be defeated? It is the application, if you will, of general systems where the entire man, the entire thing is discussed in relation to the ill of that patient, because everything changes. In ping pong, which does not correspond to to game theory at all, I have won 3 games, and game theory doesn't help a hell of a lot there. Chess. There have supposedly been a whole variety of differences. Chess does not come under this category because there are a whole series of potential changes which can occur in chess. Rappaport mentions in an article that many years ago Capablanca, playing the great Cuban champion, played Marshall, the American champion, and Marshall, at the particular point of the crucial game, opened with a very alien, a very strange, a very foreign opening. And Capablanca, having a time in which he could think about this, instead of folding up, which he said was his first reaction, and becoming panicky, instead thought for a moment and came back and accepted the challenge of Marshall and won, thus proving that he won because of a gamesmanship. He outplayed Marshall. He outplayed Marshall psychologically, as well as outplaying Marshall on the board. I'm finished. Many years ago, there was a very great Russian chess player named Bogolyubov, back in the days of the Tsar.
There is one small thing, Colonel. I have a Luftwaffe codebook with me. The top secret, of course. I wonder if you could put it in your safe.
It's not a confrontation, it's a games theory. It takes place between Tosca and Scarpia.
Of course. It's a storehouse of priceless art treasures.
Now that has great significance. We say these situations exist. These are the milieu, the environment, our kids today say ecology, in which man exists. Now you must abide by that environment. If you can't, if you're in an occupation and you cannot operate in the realm within the formal walls of that occupation, perhaps it becomes incumbent upon us to say that is the wrong occupation. That is the wrong set of values. I think that idea that it might be the wrong set of values is fraught with a great many meanings. Some could be dangerous, quite dangerous. Now, to convince the other, we must get him to listen to us. And this cannot usually be done if we ourselves do not listen. We go in one door, we go all the way around, we come out the same way. I think the word was communication. We ourselves do not listen. Therefore, we must learn to listen in the broadest sense of listening, in the sense of assuming for a while the other's world outlook. Because only in this way will we make sense of what he is saying. All these skills are related not to know-how, but to wisdom. It may happen that if we acquire the necessary wisdom, many of the conflicts that the strategy experts in their professional zeal insist on formulating as battles of wits, or worse, as a battle of wills, will be resolved of their own accord. The applicability of these factors, the theory of games, to the field of not only psychiatry, but the teaching of psychiatry, the training, I think has great value. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mike is a professional actor. He has simulated a physician in many television shows.
You better. It's the law. Cop will arrest you if he finds him.
We set you up. And the idea of this is to try to simulate a situation in which we're teaching.
The educational channel.
Well, as you might suspect, critics of evaluations glommed onto that study, which methodologically is a one-shot case study, as absolute evidence that students are incapable of judging the quality of teaching because they were seduced by a presentation that was devoid of content, and intentionally so, that the instructor, as a professional actor, was enthusiastic, engaging, but actually said nothing. Because of the tremendous interest in popular press that demonstration produced, a number of studies, a dozen studies, were done experimentally where university professors working from scripted lectures varied their expressive style and varied the degree of meaningful content in the lectures. So, and then student ratings and achievement measures were collected afterwards. So in a synthesis of those dozen studies, this is what we learned, that instructor expressiveness had a substantial impact on student evaluations, and a smaller impact on student learning, not zero, however. And that lecture content had a small effect on student ratings, but a larger effect on student achievement. So, how do we interpret this evidence? Do we make a black-white judgment that students are incapable of evaluating teaching? Well, my interpretation of that evidence is it helps explain why the correlation between ratings and achievement is moderate rather than higher than it is. So it doesn't necessarily throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it is a cautionary note. And we can talk about later the effect over the long term, because most of these experiments where expressiveness and content were manipulated were short-term investigations. And most of the participants talked about just the motivational influence of having a lecturer who presented in a very engaging fashion, that they became more interested in the topic because of the engaging nature of the presentation. None of these studies measured learner motivation, but it is absolutely a quality that we talk about when we talk about good teaching, how inspired we were, how engaged in the lecture material we were because we had an engaging professor to motivate us. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the influence of grades on rating. So yeah, we're going to show another movie now. Unfortunately, there's no popcorn today, and there's no breaks to go to the counter.
My name is Stuart Royce Dodger. I'm an independent scholar. I'm retired from Duke University. You see the gray hairs on my neck, where I was a professor of geology, environment, and engineering for 15 years. The title of my paper is When A is Ordinary, the Evolution of American College and University Grading, 1940 to 2009. I've been looking at college grading since about 1997 when I wrote a book about higher education. And for this particular paper, I wanted to look at how grades have changed from the 1940s until about present time. Since colleges have a process of grading that's unregulated, It's based on an honor system where professors are expected to grade realistically and fairly. Are professors in an unregulated system behaving according to some sort of honor code, or are they abandoning it decade by decade? From the 1920s until about the 1960s, grades across the nation were fairly uniform from school to school, and about 15% of all grades were A's. The plurality of grades were C's. In the 1960s, that grading pattern changed dramatically. Professors were willing to grade unrealistically in exchange for ensuring that male students would not have to be drafted and go to Vietnam. With the end of the Vietnam era, grades actually dropped nationally. Professors began to grade more realistically, began to follow their honor system of keeping the A reserved for excellent performance. In the early 1980s, that pattern changed. Grades started to rise again. They continued to rise from the 80s to the 90s through the 2000s, and probably continue to rise in the present day. It appears that the principal reason that grades are rising is that in the 1980s, the culture of colleges changed dramatically. Students were no longer considered acolytes trying to gain knowledge, but instead were customers in search of a degree. And in response to that cultural change, universities and colleges increasingly began to employ student-based course reviews. Whether it is true or not, faculty members believe that by giving higher grades, they will get higher course reviews. The take-home message, actually this show was called The Voice, right? And I thought it was the singing show, The Voice. So I'm going to sing it with my apologies to Frank Lesser. When you see a prof who's afraid to get tough, throws his C's, D's, and F's into the refuse, call it sad, call it funny, but it's better than even money that the prof's probably afraid of his course reviews. So the take-home message of this paper is that over the last 30 years, with the advent of student-based course reviews, professors across the nation are grading easier year by year.
I love the section of that video that's titled Findings, because I kept waiting for the evidence. Did anybody see evidence? No. So what is the evidence about the relationship between grades and ratings? Do you remember when we talked about the multi-section validity studies? What did I say? I said we're looking in those studies for relationships between ratings and learning. What is on your transcript evidence of your learning? They're grades. So when he claims that, oh my goodness, there's a relationship between grades and ratings, one interpretation is, excellent! That's exactly what we hope for. What he's actually saying is that inappropriate grading, what he's trying to say, is that inappropriate grading, inflated grading, grades that are assigned when learning has not taken place, are done to assuage students and to win their favor. That's what he's saying. But not. So we have to, when we look at this evidence, we have to disentangle from the evidence the desirable effect this desirable relationship between student evaluations and learning in the form of grades, and this biasing influence. So all of a sudden now it's becomes a methodologically complicated question. And of course, he's asking a question about causal influence. You know, grade inflation produces a substantial amount of variance in student ratings. Not that just the two are correlated. Right? He's asking a causal question. So what's the best source of evidence for addressing causal questions? You're all in psychology, you know. Experimentation reigns supreme. Right? So, again, this is a voluminous literature. How well is it going to work? Try it. This is a voluminous literature, and it's also one of the emotional questions that's debated in that room with the closed door across the hall all the time. So we want to disentangle between two hypotheses. The learning hypothesis says that differences in ratings are attributable to teacher impacts on student learning and are therefore a valid influence. And the grading bias hypothesis that says that differences in ratings are attributable to teacher grading practices and are therefore invalid influences. And as far as I know, and I haven't looked in the last couple of years, so mea culpa, the only experimental study of grading standards was one I did with my colleagues in 1980 using the Dr. Fox paradigm, where we artificially manipulated grading standards. And what we found, much to our surprise, is that those really poor quality, boring lectures, low in expressiveness and low in content, when grades were manipulated in that situation, that the students actually assigned poorer ratings. So the opposite to the leniency hypothesis is what we found, that if you will, the students got annoyed and upset that their evaluations were being bought by these poor quality teachers, and they gave worse ratings. It's the only experimental evidence I know about, and we found the opposite in that one instance. So, I've only scratched the surface of this massive literature, tens of thousands of studies. So what do we know? First of all, if you accept that the moderate relationship between ratings and teacher-produced student learning is reasonable, then student ratings are psychometrically defensible. But they're not perfect. And because of that, when they're used for summative decisions, we have to use them wisely. Whether we're doing that normatively by comparing faculty to each other, or in a criterion-based evaluation situation where faculty are evaluated against some standard of excellence. In both cases, what we want to do is get away from the idea of using point estimations and making decimal point discriminations among faculty to use confidence intervals. So statistics 101. And what I wanted to show you here is a way to create those confidence intervals in a way that introduces the validity coefficient into the equation and therefore makes the confidence intervals a little bit wider than they would be if the validity coefficient was not taken into account. So here's the strategy for norm-based. I'm not going to run you through the mathematics of it. but just to make the point that the validity coefficient is included. And then talk about some of the criteria for making summative decisions about teaching. I think everyone can get access to my PowerPoint, so I'm not going to run through all of those nine points. But I did want to talk about one alternative to the typical way that ratings are done, and that is to use what in testing is called a test blueprint or table of specifications. Because really what we're especially interested in is not how a teacher teaches for summative purposes, but whether that teaching has impact. So a table of specification outlines what is to be learned and how it is to be learned. So in the columns, you'll notice I've used the original Bloom's taxonomic classification: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis. And what this kind of table of specifications rating would do would be to take each of the key components of a course. Here it's a course on psychological statistics, and the student rates not only how much they learn, but the quality of learning that happened. Did the instructor focus really on just, regurgitation of basic facts, or did you work on higher level evaluative aspects and so on? So as far as I know, this kind of evaluation strategy has never been tried, so there's no evidence on it, but I think this is a kind of move in the direction of more refined evaluation of learning outcomes that we should consider doing. So at the beginning, I made the distinction between evaluation used for summative purposes and evaluation for formative purposes. And I asked the faculty here how many of them had actually been trained as teachers and how many of them had access here to faculty development officers who could be of assistance in improving their teaching. So if there are any administrators in the room who want to be identified as administrators, one of the things about assessment is that the administration and the faculty and the students together have a responsibility of making teaching excellent. It's not just the faculty member's responsibility, but it's a responsibility that's shared. So if a faculty member is not teaching as well as he or she should, there should be options and alternatives for improvement. So at many universities, they have offices of faculty development who work with new faculty, untenured faculty, sometimes offering courses to senior graduate students on teaching, non-credited courses. And these kinds of things, faculty development offices, courses on teaching for doctoral students, are very, very important if the craft of teaching is to be taken seriously. We need to get away from the notion, and this is a famous expression, that faculty say, I teach physics, I don't teach students. That's wrong. We teach students. We have to keep that in mind. But we need to provide the strategies and the techniques and the resources to help teachers improve, to learn about teaching. So course evaluations can serve that purpose, but they're better done towards the middle of a course rather than towards the end of a course, so that faculty can make changes during the course. And what I really like to recommend is that those evaluations be shared with students, so that the students know about the class's reaction to teaching. Now, this takes a certain type of contract with learners. We still maintain anonymity, but it's nice if you share with students the strengths of your course as well as areas in need of improvement. And then also to use a faculty development officer to help interpret those data with you. And I think especially important is to use what I call a cafeteria system of evaluation. So not just this fixed instrument which measures these set dimensions of teaching, but that each faculty member has available to him or her a collection of items, a cafeteria from which he can choose specific aspects of teaching that he's focusing on. So some kind of blend between the fixed form and a customized form for faculty. The last thing I wanted to talk about are technological tools for assisting faculty. So there is a fairly large global movement now to introduce portfolios. Everybody knows what an artist or an architect portfolio is, where it's a container where they place their work. And this idea of a portfolio in electronic form is becoming increasingly popular for students to enclose their work. And there's really two types of those portfolios. There's what's called a showcase portfolio, where the final products are available in electronic form. And of course, when we use electronic media, it can be multimedia, so it doesn't just have to be papers. It could be videos, it could be audio clips, and so on. And then something called a process portfolio. So a process portfolio shows your progress during a learning event, right? Where you began, what your goals were, and how those plans evolved over time. And it's very consistent, and I'm sure you're all in psychology, so you all know about this notion of self-regulated learning, right? Everybody's heard of Zimmerman's notion of self-regulated learning. So what we want to do is bring that notion of self-regulated learning to teaching by using electronic portfolios that scaffold that process of self-regulation. So this is the Zimmerman model of self-regulation, in colloquial terms, this cyclical process is divided into three parts: planning, doing, and reflecting. So this is what we want faculty to do, is be purposeful and self-regulating in their teaching. So whether that self-regulation process is one where the whole course is under consideration, or just a particular segment of the course, a lecture or a presentation or a session, we want faculty to be very purposeful about planning, about actively thinking about what they're doing as it's going on and how it's going, and then afterwards to reflect on what occurred for the purposes of self-assessment and self-improvement. So here are the stages: planning, doing, reflecting stages. And this is what we want to use electronic portfolios for in this formative process of teaching development. So it becomes quite a purposeful, self-regulatory act. And as I said, we do have tools for that purpose. One of them is called ePROL, and it's using technology to help scaffold that process. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully I entertained you, but in a way that was meaningful and purposeful. So thank you very much.
Take a few questions. Short questions and short answers.
Hi, enjoyed your talk. A couple of things. One is you said you thought it was good to have the feedback halfway through the course. I tend to disagree with that because, in my experience, if we're talking about typical courses where you lecture every week or anything similar, whilst there are some good students, the typical student may often be slightly behind where you'd like them to be. You know, they maybe missed last week's lecture and they didn't quite get around to doing the reading they were supposed to do, and it's always a bit of a struggle and not quite up with where you'd like to be. And it is only actually when they get to the end of the course and they maybe have to do the assessment and really engage with the material and then maybe revise for the exam, that they're actually really in a position to say, yes, I learnt a lot from that course, or no, I didn't learn very much from it. And therefore I would actually like proper feedback to only be done after the course has been completed and they've done the full lot of work, so then can really reflect on whether they learned from that course or not.
Well, I'll say two things in reaction to the question. First of all, there's been research conducted on when during the course evaluations are accurate, in part to address the very concern that you have about whether evaluations done early are less accurate than evaluations done later in the course. And the evidence seems to suggest that students form very reliable and accurate assessments of teaching after only 2 or 3 lectures. They don't change dramatically in their opinion, later in a course. So the evidence is more in favor of the early assessment rather than late assessment. But remember, what we're talking about here is formative assessment of teaching, and by doing an evaluation midway through a course, really what you're saying to students is, I want to fine-tune this course for you, not the next group of learners who come after you, but for you. And if you wait to do that assessment at the end of the course, you don't have that opportunity to improve the course for that group of learners. So that's the major reason.
What we actually do is we have what we call a dipstick audit, which is a very quick and short and sweet little email sent around to the students, basically saying, is everything going okay? You know, is the lecturer turning up? Has he got some slides? Is everything sort of okay?
Yeah.
Very short and sweet after 2 or 3 weeks to check that it's not a disaster, and then a bigger one again.
There's actually some people advocate a strategy called the 1-minute assessment, where at the end of every lecture, it takes really 30 seconds, under a minute, you give feedback to the instructor on that lecture. And that might be a bit excessive at times, but the idea is you're trying to take instantaneous feedback from the learners to improve what you're doing, and it absolutely helps create an informal contract with the learners that their learning is important to you. If I had my druthers for summative purposes, absolutely, at the end of, despite what the evidence says, absolutely at the end of the course. But we're talking about formative.
Just one other comment.
Sure.
Apart from the effect of evaluations on grading, the other thing that concerns me is the pressure to dumb down courses. So typically, say, I teach quantitative methods to MBA students. MBA students hate quantitative methods in large because they're pretty non-numerate. They give bad feedback because they don't like the course, and so there's a huge temptation to take out the hard bits and make it more and more palatable for them, even though you know that really you should do the hard bits. And those who dumb them down get better ratings, and that's the problem.
Well, I feel your pain because I too teach quantitative methods, and I did my duty for a quarter of a century and said, I've done my duty, so I stopped. Yeah. The counterpoint to the I teach physics or I teach statistics, not students, is that I teach students first. And while it's quite pejorative to say, I have to dummy down the course, what dumbing down the course does is recognize the level at which the learners are at. And what you do when you teach the students is maximize the learning for them. So I think the larger issue here is the prerequisite skills that learners bring to an advanced quantitative methods course, and whether they have those prerequisite skills to accomplish the requirements of the course as you said it. But that's always it's a very important and actually profound question about how you find the balance between course content and the prior achievements and prior learning of the students. And I think if you proceed without understanding and a sympathy for where the students are at, you're not going to maximize their learning. But controversial topic, and as I said, a quarter of a century of trying to teach the central limit theory. They don't get it.
Don't need to be